Hey, you lovely lot, and welcome back to Crime Analyst and the Intelligence Cell. Today I'm going to talk about a very troubling case, a terrible case. It's harrowing, but it needs to be talked about. And that's the case, the murder of 6-year-old Corey Micciolo. Now, you may have heard about this case. It's been on the news. There's a trial that's ongoing. It's been called the Treadmill abuse murder case, and it's in New Jersey. And on April the 2nd, 2021, Corey was taken to hospital, and his biological father, Christopher Gregor, took him to hospital, and he left him there, and Corey died alone. These are important facts. Christopher Gregor, the biological father, is now on trial for Corey's murder. And before I get into the detail, because I want to unravel it, and this is a very difficult case to cover, it's very upsetting, but we have to talk about Corey, and I really want to give him a voice. It's so important to advocate for him. I just want to, before I get into the details, I just want to thank you all for subscribing to Crime Analyst, for your super thanks. Thank you for your donations. They mean the world to me because it takes a lot of time to prepare videos like this, and I do it to educate and to help people understand what went on, and that's a very important part to my work. So I appreciate you supporting me and watching, and also if you haven't subscribed just yet, then please do. And if you want more content, you can go over to Crime Analyst podcast. I cover different cases there, and also the Crime Analyst Squad, which is on Patreon. You can join the Crime Analyst Squad, where I do deeper dives. There are longer interviews, exclusive coverage of cases, as well as exclusive extra content and happy hours where you can engage with me, questions and answers, that sort of thing, and community chat. So it's a great place for deeper engagement. So just go over to patreon.com/crime analyst. Okay, I want to get back to Corey. There's a lot to cover, and I want to just explain to you that Brianna was Corey's mum, and she had dropped Corey off at Gregor's house at 9 a.m. on April the 2nd, 2021, so the day Corey died. And Gregor said that Corey had had a nap, and then he had woken up and he was being sick, and that he was slurring his words, he was having trouble breathing, and he took him to the emergency room at Southern Ocean County Medical Center. He was almost lifeless at the time, and Corey was being assessed. Doctors were trying to understand what was going on for Corey, and he suffered a seizure during the CT scan. And Corey died alone because Gregor had left him there, and his mother hadn't been notified of which hospital he was in. And the fact that he was left alone to die with strangers, I mean, this is just haunting and harrowing, this callous disregard. And that was the first thing that really struck me about this case of why would a biological father leave a 6-year-old alone when he had such serious health issues and he died on his own. And I still struggle with that, but it paints a picture, and that picture is one that we must really understand, because Corey did die alone, without his mum, without anybody who loved him around him. And that's something that his mum now has to live with, Brianna. I'm a mother too, to a toddler. And when you're a parent, these cases just land and hit differently. And so I know how difficult it is to watch and listen to this, but we must bear witness. It's so important to bear witness and to advocate for others. The forensic pathologist, who was also a pediatrician in his career, he was also a former chief medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Andrew. I watched him testify, and he determined that this was a homicide, that Corey had been subjected to chronic child abuse, and that there was blunt force injuries to his chest, to his abdomen, and a laceration to his heart. That's what killed him. but importantly, the child abuse before. So I want to get into some of that because it's important that we understand chronic signs of abuse, and that it wasn't just about those injuries that he presented with. And often it's about the pattern and distribution of injuries. So I'm going to come to that. It's also, I was very curious about Christopher Gregor and who he is and what he's about. And he wasn't in Corey's life until Corey was 5 years old, and he was 6 when he died. And it was on October 28th, 2020, that Judge Silver at the family court ordered that Corey should go and live with his biological father, who he had no relationship with before. He'd been living with his mum. And I'm going to come back to that because that, to me, is deeply disturbing. Also, the day before Corey died, Brianna was so worried about him, she took him to see a pediatrician. And Corey was examined by Dr. Nancy Deacon. She said, and I listened to her testify, watched her testify, that Corey was quiet, sat on the exam table when she went into the room, that he was stoic, that he was very serious. Now they're not normal reactions from a 6-year-old boy, but in different settings, then maybe they can be a little bit more circumspect, but that would be a flag to me. And the fact that he had these bruises on his head, his hip, his chest, his arm, and the paediatrician was trying to ascertain where these injuries were from, and he didn't want to say. So again, that's another red flag. The little boy didn't want to say. His mother was very worried, and he was looking to his mum. And the paediatrician kept pressing, saying, I need to understand. In order to help you, I need to understand where you got these injuries from. So eventually he said it was from playing football, and she continued to press. And then he said it was when he fell from a treadmill. So again, a 6-year-old on a treadmill, I would be asking questions about that. This is about being professionally curious. A 6-year-old has no business being on a treadmill. He became tearful, and he asked her to promise not to tell anyone what he was going to tell her. And he said that his father put him on that treadmill, and he didn't want to tell on his father, but he was told that he was too fat and he had to go on that treadmill. So again, huge red flag. These are things that must be questioned further, particularly when you've got injuries presenting. And he was examined but given a clean bill of health. So those injuries were not life-threatening. And I'm going to come back to that too, because the next day he was dead from life-threatening injuries. So the timeline, the sequence of events are very important in this case, as I'm sure you can appreciate. The paediatrician, saying that he was subdued, also important. All this information. And the paediatrician actually sobbed when testifying, and I can understand why, but you cannot miss these signs. And on March the 31st, 2021, Mum Brianna filed for an emergency custody order and requested through the Department of Child Protection and Permanency, the DCPP, had shown this treadmill video, which is really distressing, had shown them that video and also his injuries that were documented, and she'd applied for an emergency custody order, and the judge had seen that video. And I'm going to show you the video first of all and then let you know what the judge determined. So I'm going to play the video, and let me just tell you, it is upsetting and distressing, but you have to see it because this is what the judge made their decision from, and it's also what the jury will be weighing up. And for me, it shows a very clear pattern of behaviour and the interaction between them. So I'm going to play this now. So deeply disturbing, the video. You can see Corey falling at least 6 times. He's forced back on the treadmill. You can see him biting down on his head. And he sped up the treadmill, he increased the incline. I mean, this is cruel and callous behaviour, and he's clearly punishing Corey for something. And it doesn't matter what, it's the fact that you can see these behaviours And for me, in my opinion, this is child abuse. Saying he's too fat, forcing him to be on the treadmill, these are indicators of coercive control and child abuse, in my opinion. And there were other documents, there was other evidence, photographic evidence of bite marks, what looked like bite marks, bruises, petechiae to his eyes. And petechiae normally comes from strangulation or from an injury. It's actually very important to look for and assess. But the petechiae, I'd seen pictures of Corey, really big blood spotting in his eyes, burst blood capillaries from something quite serious, I would say. But a judge looked at this, and that judge, this was the determination, didn't find Corey is in imminent or irreparable harm. From looking at that video and all the documented evidence where there's clear evidence and indicators of abuse. Now, given that the judge refused to grant Brianna emergency custody, she had to hand Corey back over to Gregor on April the 2nd. So in the morning, she took him back. She had been with him at the paediatrician and at hospital till 1 a.m. the following day, when he was given a clean bill of health. And he was dropped off at 9 a.m. and by 3:30 p.m. he was taken to hospital, and he was almost lifeless. He was slurring his words, he'd been sick, and the timeline is very important because Corey died 2 hours later, all alone, as I said, without Gregor even telling Brianna from her testimony where her son Corey was. She had to call around, she called police, she called the hospitals, and my heart aches and hurts for Corey, for the fact that he was subjected to such horrific abuse and cruelty, and that he had to endure that, and that he died alone. Now, when you look at the history, his mum, Brianna, had made 100 complaints reporting the abuse to DCPP, and she had reported the first time in September 2019, when Gregor had first spent time with Corey. She reported again April 2010, July 2020, again on April the 1st, 2021, and the day that he died. She had photographed the injuries, the bruises, the bust lips, the scrapes, the petechiae in the eye, the bite, what looked like bite marks to me. So there's documented evidence. And importantly, Corey had said that he was scared of Gregor. So when you're looking at a full assessment, you ask the child. And she spoke with DCPP and nothing happened. I just find this astounding. I find this very difficult to wrap my head around, and I find it, the lack of professional curiosity. And Brianna said the more he got away with it, the worse the abuse got. Just think about that. I say that all the time with abusers, that they get enabled and greenlit if we don't intervene, if we don't hold them to account. And no one protected Corey. His mum tried, but no one stepped in. In fact, a New Jersey child protection officer saw bruising on Corey about a week before his death. So why didn't DCPP intervene? Where was the safeguarding? What were the police doing? What were all these professionals doing? And what about the judge and the flawed decision making? They all failed Corey. And there has to be accountability, in my opinion. There has to be accountability and justice for Corey, and that's why I wanted to talk about what happened to him. I'm so deeply disturbed by the documented injuries and the fact that Brianna was ignored. 100 reports. And that led me to think about, why would that be the case? Why was it that Brianna wasn't taken seriously despite the physical evidence? And I have to wonder, I mentioned about Corey only meeting Gregor in 2019, but it was October the 28th, 2020, where a family court judge, Judge Silver, ordered him to reside with Gregor. And he'd been living with his mum prior to that. And I listened to his mum testify, and she said, and it was up front in her testimony, that she had a drugs problem. and she knew she had to get clean. She got pregnant at 17. So when she was testifying, she was 27, but she was 17 when she got pregnant. And she said that Corey was conceived due to a sexual assault by Gregor and that he was abusive. So just think about that. Oftentimes people use drugs to escape their reality. So here we've got somebody who says that she was sexually assaulted, and she apparently was applying for the state to help with financially, and the state asked about who the father was, and she said, and they then found Gregor, and they said that he must pay the child maintenance, child contact, and that he must pay, and then that she must pay the state back the money that she had received previously. And Brianna said that was a huge mistake, but that's what happened. And then Gregor wanted custody of Corey. And so that happened in October the 28th, 2020. And within 6 months, Corey was dead. I just want you to think about that timeline. And why was it that Brianna wasn't taken seriously then? Was it because she had a drugs issue and she got clean and then they got joint custody? And was it because of the drugs issue, or was it because she was female? Was it something else? I can't answer that other than to say that I would suspect that it's to do with drugs, the fact that she was female, the family court matter. But I will share with you that Gregor has a dozen criminal charges against him, including assault, including robbery and destruction of property. And he's been shown to be a bad actor, cruel and callous. And apparently he was saying that he was toughening up his 6-year-old boy, toughening him up. 6-year-olds do not need toughening up. Corey received life-ending injuries after being in Gregor's care, and there's a pattern here. And he was caught on camera, the treadmill. The treadmill, I'm not going to call it an incident because abuse is always a pattern of behaviour. And so I hope when the jury see that they make the right decision. And that documented history really does matter. That must be taken into consideration, the pattern. Now, when I talked about the paediatrician giving Corey a clean bill of health the day before he was killed, I wondered about that. I wondered how a paediatrician could miss these things. Well, autopsies reveal a whole load more, and they reveal the true story of what's going on, particularly in abuse cases. That's what we call the victims. You've probably heard the phrase silent witnesses. And the science, the evidence does not lie, but I can tell you abusers do. And Dr. Thomas Andrew, he was the forensic pathologist, a former paediatrician, chief medical examiner. When he testified, he explained things in more detail. And he explained that Corey died from the blunt force trauma injuries, or I should say the blunt force injuries to his chest and to his abdomen, and a laceration to his heart. Now, none of these things were visible. The injuries weren't visible, and that's probably why they weren't picked up by the paediatrician, although they should have asked far more rigorous questions about abuse. And the forensic pathologist, Dr. Thomas Andrew, interpreted the injuries that were on Corey and believed there to be chronic child abuse when Corey was opened up. So when the autopsy happened, the tear in the heart was seen, the contusions to the liver. Okay, and that's what effectively killed him. He went into cardiac arrest. And the tear to the heart, it matters where it is and how long it is. But that was ultimately what killed him. And the manner, it was determined that it was a homicide. So somebody did that to him. It wasn't something that happened naturally. Someone did this to him. And importantly, he observed scalp contusions, so bruising to the scalp when peeling the scalp back. And I'm sorry to be graphic here, but there was bruising on his back. There was a bruise underneath his chin. There was a large abrasion on his hip. Now, these contusions weren't life-threatening on their own, but the chin, a bruise being there on his trunk, on his the left side of his chest and on his hip, well, they reveal he may well have been restrained. The under the chin You see, and it's the pattern and the distribution of injuries that are indicative of child abuse. And well, it's very hard to date bruises, but some of them were older injuries. So there were older injuries as well as new injuries. And the forensic pathologist said that these weren't through CPR, so they weren't through administering CPR. And Dr. Andrew believed that there was a time window when the life-threatening injuries, or they actually proved to be fatal injuries, were received, and he originally put it down between 4 and 12 hours prior. So when looking at the timeline, it's important because Brianna dropped him off at 9 a.m. in the morning. But what's interesting was there was a bit of footage played at court, a video of, hang on one second, there was a video played at court, and it was a little video clip of the camera was sort of upside down. It clearly wasn't meant to have been shot, but Brianna was talking to Corey and Corey was replying, and he sounded like he was normal. And the doctor said, the forensic pathologist, that these injuries, he wouldn't have been able to respond in the way that he heard him in that video, and that he would have been slurring, he would have been stumbling. It would have been clear that there was a problem. So he then put the window of time of being when he received these lethal injuries as being between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. So it was a 33-second video, and that's important. So when you piece these things together, and importantly, when talking about being restrained, while it may well have been that there was ongoing abuse, but I believe given the injuries that were described by medical experts, and particularly Dr. Andrew, that he was most likely restrained. And then he received those injuries. And then he died. And Gregor is arguing, his defence team, that Corey died of natural causes. Well, that's not what his body shows. The injuries are not from CPR, and Corey's body is the silent witness here. The science doesn't lie. The medical evidence doesn't lie. And as I said before, abusers do. So the jury, I hope they hear all of this and they understand what they're seeing and hearing. It's deeply distressing. And even by talking about it, maybe it will ensure, well, firstly, that Corey is advocated for, but maybe there's someone listening or watching, and it makes them more professionally curious to ask questions about what's going on, of why a little boy is scared of this man who's his biological father. I can't even call him his dad because fathers do not behave in this way to their children. This little boy, so bright, such a joy, you can see in his pictures. And he was effectively, I believe, chronically abused. He was tortured, being put on that treadmill in that way. That is absolutely callous and disgusting. And the biting, in punishing him. Well, this is a man with not just anger issues, this is controlled anger when he's being angry and punishing Corey. That's what I believe was going on. And I believe he most likely punished him for coming back late and going to the paediatrician with his mum. I mean, that's what I believe based on everything I understand of the case. Of course, the prosecution have to prove that and make that case. And I just hope the jury make the right decision. So I'm going to leave it there and say, R.I.P. Corey. And I hope in death he has peace. And I hope his mother, well, his family will live with this for the rest of their lives. But R.I.P. Corey, this sweet little boy. Until next time, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instincts.